If we're talking about a place to start when it comes to South Africa and this reset of some sort, leadership is obviously going to come to mind. What kind of leader do we need post 2024? And that's open to anybody who's going to take it. I mean, I can take it also.
The type of leader we need. I don't think we need a leader. There's this, South Africa likes saviors. South Africa doesn't need another big savior. We deify individuals within our political realm around this one person will be the panacea to all our issues. Whether it's Mandela, whether it's Mbeki, whether it's Julius Malema, whether it's Mangosuthu Buthelezi, you have literal political parties like the UDM that solely exist around one personality. If that personality disappears, the party disappears. You need a collective of individuals, so this is where I agree with Roger. You need a collective of individuals across sectors, across political spectrums, who are able to get into a room and discuss with each other without throwing stones at each other. You know, just like an honest conversation to say, we might sit on very different sides of the political spectrum, but no one's going to disagree that unemployment's a problem. So how do we then solve that? No one would fundamentally disagree with Carl to be like, apartheid spatial planning is probably one of the biggest impediments to any sort of development in any community. We then discuss what the modalities are. You just need the type of environment that allows that to happen. What we're seeing, at least in my opinion, is systems like Parliament have become increasingly, I don't want to say like fractious, they just fight over things that don't need to be fought about, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need to fight about whether we agree that unemployment's an issue, or worse off, fighting about inconsequential things, about what should be on the agenda of Parliament for this particular session. And if there was to be an individual, I wouldn't want that individual to come in and say, I am here to save you. When you go into communities and you talk to people don't care about an individual. It's people just want things to work. And that one individual can't fix a pothole by himself. You can't physically go to every single pothole and fix that. You need that collective effort, whether that's including the churches, political parties, civil society. And what I would say to Raj as well is that people have been trying to do this. So it's not as if no one's ever tried to come together. Civil society has been banding together and being shut down in multiple different forums, whether it's in the Western Cape. An organization just had a conference of 100 different organizations this week about how to fix this country. But everyone is still in their corners. And I think if there was one person, it wouldn't be how that one person fixes the country. It's about how that one person brings the conversation together. And then we can figure out how to fix the country at that point. So yeah, no, I don't know if you should deify anyone. But if you were, that person's job would be how do you then bring society together.
May I ask what's your question just on that? I'm interested to hear that because if I spoke first, I would have said, oh, we need someone that we can rally behind. But I must say I take Futse's point. So I just want to ask, so what does it look like in practice then? Is it a movement? Is it a obviously there needs to be something that I can tell my friend about that we can get excited about. So like, what is that thing?
Yeah, I mean, we see models around this. So last year, the Zambian elections were fundamentally changed because there was a movement of individuals that was grassroots that said we want to change the political dynamic and change the elections. We saw the model work in Brazil as well, of civil society in particular being mobilized against the right. We're seeing these types of organic mobilization in the almost as a response to the 2010s of the rise of the right across the world, that it's not necessarily the rise of the left in response, but it's the rise of grassroots mobilization. And that's purely around, we fight amongst each other about petty things far too much when there's a big evil. It's stopping all progress. So you see those models, of whether it is Brazil, whether you're seeing that, like I said, in Zambia, there's interesting things happening in Scandinavia, but they're too perfect apparently for us to pay attention to them. But people are showing us the models. Sometimes they work, sometimes they fail. The umbrella revolution in Hong Kong worked for a moment until it was repressed, but it gave that opportunity of what a model will look like. So that's what I kind of see it as, and I think there's scope within the country for that if it is resourced enough and people are focused on creating this kind of collective idea. It's my best guess.
Can I?
Of course.
Yeah, a renewed freedom charter. And I just want to add to that in kind of answering this question around the type of leader. So I agree that there's a movement required, right? But I also think there's like execution required. We've built too many movements around dreams, and there's been no like deliverance of execution to keep the dream going, right? And so while we talk about maybe it's not a specific individual, maybe it's a movement, for me the thing that rings true is like, can we deliver some runs? And like you say, there's alignment, there's many things we can argue about as South Africans. There's also many that we are all actually in agreement with. If we agree on even 10% of the issues on the table, and we do something about those 10% to the point where people are inspired and believing again to move on to the next 10%. I really think that there's something there. South Africans are all about the movement, the collective, the hope. I mean, we hope defying logic sometimes, right? And then we're asked to hope again. And there's general fatigue and disengagement with that. And what we actually need, I would dare say, is the boldness of conviction and the conversion of like implementation that actually results in a difference to then bolster the energy to go after the next thing or the next problem. So I would agree with that movement thing. For me, it's another movement. Can it be a movement with execution, lying right next to it? If we're going to, I do a lot of stuff in the entrepreneurship space. And you say like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. If the same output metrics are still saying SMEs are failing, are still saying there's insufficient funding going where it needs to go, are still saying like there's no difference being created from a job skills perspective, no matter what level of hype, hope I can build up in people, those metrics matter because they actually hit someone in real time as to whether a difference is made in their life. So I just want to add that dimension to agreeing with movement, agreeing with not one single individual, agreeing with the collective of leaders that make a move for change. But can there be a move? Yeah. Can there actually be a move?
Yeah. If we're speaking about people working together, sometimes we're seeing political parties from very different viewpoints coming together and saying we're actually going to work together, we're at a crisis phase, and we're going to set aside our differences to move forward. This isn't always very successful.
It isn't. And I think because party politics is based on the idea of a leader. And so even when you come together through, say, a coalition agreement or something, you're already preempting what you want the result to be. And I think people are tired of that, because if you can see that so-and-so is going to lead and we know their track record, we know what they've not been able to accomplish in our spaces, then why should we even trust a coalition agreement or a power sharing agreement? If we look across the metros, I think since about 2017, if I'm not wrong, we've seen how coalition agreements have collapsed in our very own city. And so for me, it's not about not only what type of leader, but how that leader can unlock responsiveness within the institutions that are important for getting to where we want to get to. So in my experience, there are a lot of committed people across different sectors, including government. We must not think that government is completely incompetent. People who wake up and go work in government departments every single day do not struggle with laziness. They struggle with the way that they're responding, being blocked by corruption, being blocked by party factionalism, being blocked by levels of harassment, which, to be honest, we haven't begun to deal with. And then when we see how those people try to push and how they become whistleblowers and are even assassinated, it proves that there's a level of responsiveness and competence which is just being trampled on. So whether it's a leader or a coalition or a movement, My question is, how will they unlock the responsiveness or the action that is there, and keep those who are at the top of the bottleneck accountable for some of their actions or a large part of their actions? So responsiveness really is what we need. We need to listen to those in government who have been saying that these are the problems, this is how we're trying to fix them, but when we get to a certain point, this is how we're stopped. We need to hear how grassroots movements are struggling even on the ground because some of their action is actively being stopped. And we read about this in newspapers every day. It's not a secret. But also then we need to protect those who are responding to these crises and whose lives are at risk or in danger because of that. So for me, the responsiveness and again, like you said, the accountability that comes with listening, acting and being responsive is very important.
I mean, if you're raising the fact that there are people who are capable, people who care in all sectors of the country, but there's an active blocking and there's an active challenge against people who want to move the country forward, what's to be done? And that's quite scary.
Yeah, you know, it's really fascinating listening to all of this. I think there are two ways to address the question. The one, obviously, is what kind of leader are you looking for? I think you've said that out. On that particular score, just from our own experience of running big companies, I think people appreciate decisive leaders. You know, where you, even if you're on the wrong side of the decision, you know where you stand. But no vacillating and endless debates and conversations. I find that people tend to respond more positively to that than sometimes you think when you don't make a decision, you haven't made a decision. You know, not making a decision is a decision. So there's that aspect of leadership that I think is important. But I do think leadership style becomes a big issue as well. And what I mean here is, I think a confident leader surrounds themselves with the best people. And so I feel that when you're looking at a leader, a proxy for their leadership is who is around them. So with South Africa's many problems, we look at who is around, who is dealing with these issues, okay? Are we using the best skills, the best engineers, etc.? So I think leadership style comes into focus. And in our society, where we don't really have an appetite for big man syndrome here. I don't think South Africans have that, right? That team becomes very important because through that team, we all feel involved, engaged, and agency and ownership because we see ourselves, we see people that we have confidence in, and it may not be the leader specifically. So I think that team dynamic in our society is very important.
So I think I'd like you to also respond to that and just think about what to do when there's an understanding of the challenges that there are in the country. I feel like we've solved a lot of problems here in this room. There's an understanding of the challenges, but then there's also an understanding that there are very real blocks to progress. How do you get over that, especially when there's a concerted push sometimes, as Dr. Tilenga Botau was saying, to stop that progress?
Well, I think that's linked to a lot of the way that the conversation has already unfolded. And I think part of what we are called to do right now is fashion some kind of new consensus that no one has fashioned before. And if we're talking about leadership and we're talking about where we want to go, whether it's a leader or leaders or a collective, some kind of new consensus which excites people, but not just excites people, which people believe could be achievable, needs to be fashioned, that they can be mobilized and rallied around. And I think once you craft that, the obstacles tend to, the appetite to achieve that is greater than the obstacles that can be placed in that thing's way. But what I think we haven't done in South Africa is actually fashion that consensus. We think we have a consensus. It seems to me that that consensus is fraying and decaying at the moment. And so what we really need is a collective to come together to chart what a new future would look like. A future that goes beyond 1994, by the way. I don't think 94 is the high watermark of what we can achieve as a country. I think we can do even more than what we achieved in that consensus. But to concur with Roger, what I think was interesting in that moment is that everyone was prepared to come around a table and say, let's put all the assumptions aside and try to build something from scratch. And I think we're at that point, to be honest. Like, we need to think so deep about our assumptions and build from there, because one of the problems I think we're facing is we're relying on old assumptions in the face of new problems. And so I think the obstacles, there's this phrase, and I'll end here, that often instead of trying to make a problem smaller, like what are the individual things that we can solve here, you actually need to make it bigger. And once you make the problem bigger, then many of the smaller problems resolve themselves because you've reframed the problem in an appropriate way. So in order to get around some of these obstacles, I think we need to make the problem bigger and craft a new consensus which challenges and is different from the current consensus.